minutos, o sea que rápidamente hago la introducción en español para comentarles que tenemos traducción simultánea, que está ahí abajo donde dice interpretación, o sea que pueden cliquear y cambiar su idioma de origen. So I'm going to start speaking in English. Good morning to everyone and welcome to this roundtable that is called Research and Data Priorities on International Migration, Perspectives for a World Migration Survey. The format is a little bit strange because there was a paper that was distributed with the people who will be discussants in this roundtable. So what we are going to do is to present this proposal for the World Migration Survey, and then we will get some comments. First of all, let me tell you that the idea of this roundtable is to discuss this survey. And as you know, the idea of the survey is to fill a significant data gap at a worldwide level by generating information, comparable information worldwide in both origin and destination countries on patterns, causes, and consequences of migration. This proposal was generated within the context of the IUSSP panel on international migration. And as you can imagine, was originally initiated before COVID-19. So it will obviously, for the implementation, we require to get some form of normality. But on the other hand, the inclusion of specific questions will also shed some light on consequences of the pandemic on mobility patterns and migrants' well-being. So for presenting this proposal in society and to get some feedback and comments, we have invited three very distinguished discussants. Silvia Giorgiuli, who is a professor, well, needs no introduction among us, but I will say because it is, being filmed for other parts of the world. He's professor at the Center for Demographic, Urban and Environmental Studies at El Colegio de Mexico, and she's also the president of El Colegio de Mexico. Frank Laxlow, who is the director of the Global Migration Data Analysis Center of the International Organization for Migration, and Diego Iturralde, who is the Chief Director of Demography and Population Statistics at Statistics South Africa. And he's also co-chair of the UN Expert Group on International Migration Statistics. Philip Fargues will be presenting the proposal. And Dr. Fargues is professor at the European University Institute, where he founded the Migration Policy Center. He held senior positions at the National Institute for Demographic Studies in France and in many other universities in the world. After this presentation, we will invite the discussant in the following order. Silvia will go first, and then Frank, and last but not least, Diego. I really implore you all to stick on your time so we can leave some room for discussions, but I don't know if that's gonna be true. So please, if you can make a little bit shorter, your presentation would be great. Before we start, it is a pleasure to give the floor to Helen Percy-Crayley. Helen is professor of geography and environmental studies at Colgate University, and she's the chair of the International Migration IUSSP panel, and she will briefly share with us some of the activities that the panel has been carrying out. Thanks a lot. I give you the floor, Helen.
Thank you so much, Marcela. Thank you. And greetings from upstate New York, where we are in a blizzard. I'm looking out at snow right now. And I'm very pleased to participate in this critical conversation and represent the IUSSP panel on international migrations, strengthening the knowledge base for policy, and to learn from such and listen to such esteemed scholars as are participating in this session. Our current scientific panel of the IUSSP is composed of 7 colleagues, Marcella and Philippe Farks, also Guy Abel from Shanghai University and the Asian Demographic Research Institute, Mariama Awambila from the University of Ghana, Bella Hovey from UN DESA, and Marie McAuliffe from IOM. Diego Iturralde from Statistics South Africa, who is with us today, has provided guidance along this path of advancing the World Migration Survey, and we're indebted to his wisdom and his wit. Our liaison to the IUSSP Secretariat is Professor Mohammad Jalal Abazi Shabazi from the University of Tehran. And we're also supported by the Executive Director, Mary Ellen Zupan, and the Deputy Executive Director, Paul Monet. We couldn't work without their support. During our 3-year tenure, we're focusing on 3 activities. One is somewhat subversive. That is, we're working to engage the full suite, the full population of population scientists in engaging international migration and mobilities in the study of all demographic dynamics and processes. Our recent webinar on the legacies of the COVID pandemic for international migration and mobility research highlighted the work of Professor Andrew Tatum at the University of Southampton and his team, his World Pop team, who showed the intersections among migration and mobility, disease, transmission and diffusion, health, all gendered and all aged. And so Andrew and his team were able to really illustrate these intersections. Second, we're focusing on training, and our good colleague Guy Abel has been doing a series of training sessions on migration measurement and estimation using R software. He's also working on developing a training manual with James Raymer that can be distributed to this next generation of population scientists and emerging scholars. Last week, I, with Marie Luce Bia Zanfinikama from IOM, participated in the inaugural African Online School of Migration Statistics, again, in the spirit of training and engaging demography within national statistical offices. This new project, which is really a model, was supported by the African Union Commission, IOM GIMDAC, and Statistics Sweden. And third, the panel seeks to advance the collection of migration data and demographic data more generally to reinvigorate the case for the World Migration Survey, which is, of course, what brings us together this morning and this afternoon. We have previously engaged in our colleagues at other convenings. For example, Marcella initiated a panel at the Argentinian Population Studies Association and the International Congress of the Southern Cone. Mariama led a conversation at the Union for African Population Studies. Marcella and Philippe led a broad conversation at the International Forum for Migration Statistics. And recently, with the support of our colleague Frank Lasko of IOM GIMDAC, we made presentations at the specialized technical group on migration of the African Union Commission regarding the possibility, the prospects, the hopes and dreams and aspirations for the piloting of a world migration survey. So Marcella, thank you again for bringing us together in dialogue, in critical discussion of the prospects for a world migration survey. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Helen. Now I pass the floor to Philippe.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Just one question, Marcella, before I start. Do you have the PowerPoint or?
Yes, I have. Do you want it now? Yes, of course.
You have it?
Yes.
And you will take care of that because I would be absolutely unable to do it from here. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
it's
perfect.
already there.
Yeah. Okay, very, very good.
Okay.
So how now can I do with this stuff? Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this Congress. The paper I'm going to present is on the prospects of a world migration survey. That paper was developed jointly with Marcela in the framework of the IUSSP panel on international migration led by Hélène. And it benefited from comments from our colleague in Ghana, Mariama Wumbila. Can we move to, yes, that's okay. So the first question I think is why a world migration survey? Yes, thank you. Migration is very high on political agendas. It's also a vibrant domain in the economic and social sciences. But the current knowledge on migration is incomplete and extremely unbalanced. It is concentrating on a few countries and mostly OECD countries with an enormous deficit of knowledge as regards the developing world. It is concentrating also on few aspects of migration, on immigrants much more than on immigrants, on stocks of migrants more than on flows, on regular migrants, almost ignoring irregular migration in terms of measuring the phenomenon at least, and on few individual characteristics which make it difficult to really analyze the causes and consequences of migration. Moreover, traditional tools such as population censuses, household surveys, administrative routines, etc., first, are not used in all countries. In many countries, we know almost nothing about international migration. Second, when they are used, they miss a significant part of global migrant flows and stocks, of their determinants and consequences. And to sum up, they bring insufficient knowledge to monitor the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals or the Global Compact on Migration or the Global Compact on Refugees. Well, of course, we also know that innovative data, such as the so-called big data, are extremely promising. Still, further methodological efforts are needed in order to be able to extract from this enormous mass of new data robust knowledge on migration. Next slide, please. The idea of a world migration survey is not new, and as it is written here, we are not inventing anything here. Our model, and I want to insist on this, our model was and is the World Fertility Survey. That survey was conducted some 50 years ago under the leadership of a statistician, Maurice Kendall. And to put it bluntly, the World Fertility Survey was to allow the most significant breakthrough in the knowledge of the world's demography. The idea of a World Migration Survey was floated several times since mainly the 2000s, and I will just cite a few eminent colleagues. Douglas Massey talked about that, Richard Bilsborough, Chris Beauchemin, James Reimer, and others. More recently, the IUSSP on ad hoc panel at the World Population Conference in Cape Town also developed something on this idea. But the important point is that this idea is an old idea, but it was never implemented, or it never started to be implemented. And we really think that time has come to start conducting the World Migration Survey in the wake of the 2020 round of population censuses. Following slide. So what are the purposes and the expected outcomes of the World Migration Survey? Let me start by stating the obvious. The world is not divided into two sorts of countries, origin and destination countries. Every country in the world, every country with no exception, is both origin and destination for migrants. So the World Migration Survey ideally would try to fill in the entire origin destination matrix of migration flows and stocks. Of course, we will be very far from this. Realistically, many cells of that matrix will remain blank. But the important point is that the same Unicode module should be applied to all countries that are selected for that World Migration Survey. Well, every country is at the same time origin and destination of migrants, but most countries are predominantly either origin countries of migrants or destination countries for migrants. It means that specific modules which will be adapted to either predominantly origin or predominantly destination countries will be developed in the framework of that migration survey. Data generated by the World Migration Survey will be obtained using common definitions and instruments. Data should also allow for migration trends and migrant populations characteristics to be combined between different countries and ideally to be combined at world level. In addition to knowing migration trends at population level, we want that survey to be useful also to study migration at individual level. And for this, it will include a biographical and multi-movement information which will allow for understanding individual decision-making processes. So biographies are now common tools in many fields of population studies, and we want to use this. Finally, the World Migration Survey would describe migration at a precise moment in time, the moment when the survey is conducted. But migration is a continuous phenomenon, not only continuous, but it changes all the time. So to address the limitation of a survey conducted at a precise moment in time, what we want to do is including in the World Migration Survey specific questions about whether migrants are recorded or not with a variety of administrations, and mainly public state administrations. And doing so to generate multipliers to adjust administrative data on migration in order to be able to continuously update our knowledge on migration in a particular country, particular population, etc. Following slide, please. So now a few words about our conceptual approach that will guide the World Migration Survey. Yes, this slide, thank you. The objective of the World Migration Survey is to provide data for the analysis of causes and consequences. Schematically, this matrix explains what we want to do. It has 3 levels of analysis: the level of the individual migrant and 2 levels for populations, 1 level for the origin population and the other one for the destination population. It has also 2 domains, the causes on one side and the consequences on the other side of migration. 3 multiplied by 2 equal 6. We have 6 types of variables in this. So I'm going to review briefly cell by cell this matrix, starting from cell number 1 and going to cell number 6. So first cell, individual factors that promote migration. Let me talk about the push factors of migration. International migrants, and I think it's important to emphasize this, are a small or very small minority in their population of origin. They are a minority, but they are not a randomly selected minority. On the contrary, they are selected for good reasons. You know, not everyone becomes a migrant. So who, how, and why a few selected and very often self-selected individuals will become migrants while the vast majority of the population will not migrate. What we want to have is then unbiased information about those who emigrate and to be able to differentiate between the characteristics of migrants and the characteristics of non-migrants. We want to have the same information on the non-migrant population in the origin country. So sample frames should be carefully designed in order, on one side, to minimize the size of the sample by oversampling regions of high immigration, but on the other side, extending the sample to non-migrant sending regions, though these regions will be undersampled. So that's very important. Otherwise, we would obtain a biased image of the reasons why some people move while others do not. Okay, now let me move to the second cell, which is the root causes or contextual push factors, if you allow me the expression of push factors. The root causes characterize the whole population, by contrast with the individual push factors that we just reviewed, the whole population in the origin countries. Economic and political context explains why selected people move or stay, but they do not differentiate between individuals. You live in a country, in a place which is characterized by a certain numbers of variables, whether yourself you're a migrant or not. So these root causes will not be the subject of specific questions in the questionnaire of the World Migration Survey itself, as much as complementary databases that we are going to use in the World Migration Survey, but not to collect, not to construct ourselves. And these complementary databases will provide information at country or regional level, okay? Now, let me move to cell number 3, which is the factors that generate attraction. And for commodity, let me talk about the pull factors of migration. Migration is motivated by people's drive to improve their life chances. Factors in the destination countries play a big role. And these factors are drivers, among others, of migration. I'm talking about job opportunities, the presence of migrant communities, the level of income, migration policies, the rule of law in the destination country, etc. These factors cannot be studied directly through interviews in the questionnaire of the survey. Again, they will be captured, measured through complementary databases using comparable information in different countries to systematically contrast the characteristics of origin on one side and destination context on the other side. Here, a remark I think I want to highlight, which is the effect of networks. It's an important variable. It's important in terms of attracting the people. You have a network or you don't have, but it is measuring that effect is sensitive to the sampling method. And in many cases, migration surveys were conducted introducing bias by limiting the sample to places where migrants concentrate. In these places, non-migrants are exposed or particularly exposed to migrants. So they are exposed to networks of migrants. And they are much more exposed to networks of migrants than non-migrants living in places where you don't have that concentration of migrants. And this is why overstating network drivers can be a bias if you limit your sample to regions with a high concentration of migrants. Do not forget the regions with low concentration of migrants or no migrants at all, when you want to understand why people move, okay? Now, let me move to the consequences now, and to cell number 4, migration in the life cycle. Migration is a key milestone in the course of an individual's life. Interestingly, it always takes place, the first migration at least, at very specific ages, around 25, between 25 and 30 years of age. And it takes place at key moments as regards the education of individuals, their work, entry or beginnings on the labor market, marriage and family building, etc. At the same time, migration can be cause or consequence of several other changes. And this is why we want to have, even though they will be short, biographies in that World Migration Survey, meaning questionnaire bringing retrospective information through dated events on individual migrants, okay? Now let me move to the next cell, number 5. Migration is, of course, extremely important in the origin countries of migrants. It brings changes. It brings changes through a number of channels, in particular economic channels, and at household level, data on remittances, on business formation that was possible through migration, on investment made by migrants, etc., will be included in the questionnaire of the survey. At macro level, other changes such as economic macro changes, political changes, cultural developments, etc., will also be taken into account, but not using the questionnaire of the survey as much as using the complementary data sets I've been already talking about several times. Last cell of this approach, migrants' inclusion in destination country, so cell number 6. International migration is source of positive or negative economic, social, cultural changes in the destination countries. Assessing immigrants' economic inclusion will be extremely important through that survey. Looking at similarities and differences between immigrants on one side and non-migrants or natives in the receiving population, the destination population, is key in this. So it means that the same core questionnaire will be used for both immigrants and non-migrants in the receiving population. But also assessing immigrants' non-economic, but social, cultural inclusion is important as well. It is often more complex, and a diversified approach will be necessary for this, using not only survey data, but again, other sort of data. And we have in mind, for example, census data, which provide precise places where people live. So, which make it possible to understand whether migrants on one side and natives on the other side live in the same neighborhoods or not, which is, of course, a critical dimension of integration. Next slide, please. So, survey design now. We are going to collect six types of variables, which I've been providing some details about in the preceding slides. So we are, for this, combining two approaches. One is the household survey, and the other one is the use of external databases. Household survey first. That survey will have 4 modules, basically 4 modules. One will be the core module that will consider all individuals in the household, whether they are migrants or not. This covers the all selected sampled individuals in the whole population. Then 3 specific modules. a module on immigration. That module will be more important in countries that are predominantly origin countries of migrants. A second module on immigration or immigrants, which will be more important in countries that are predominantly destination countries for migrants. And a fourth module, sorry, on returnees, because return migration is a pattern in many parts of the world. Now, I said that not only we're going to conduct a household survey, but we're going to use complementary databases in order to provide information at regional and country level. And this information covers quite a wide range of data, and we are not limited by money as we are regarding the questionnaire. For example, income per capita, poverty, human development, governance, the rule of law, political violence, environmental threats, etc. So we're going to use databases for this. The important point is that these databases will be used for modeling the effects of contextual factors on migration probabilities. Okay. Next sample on the sampling design. So the objectives of our sample of our survey is to provide unbiased, and it's important to insist on unbiased information on immigration and non-migrant in predominantly origin countries, unbiased information also on immigration and native populations in destination countries, and also statistically representative results at national level. For this, data must be collected on migrants and non-migrants in any area that will be selected in the survey. And not only areas with high concentration of migrants. I say it for the third time, but I think it's important. The problem is for this, that ad hoc sampling frames in many countries just do not exist. I would say that for most countries in the world, we don't have the necessary population registries to do this sort of sampling. So what are we going to do? Please, next slide. What we can do is, of course, we could think of taking advantage of regular household or labor force surveys. But the samples of these surveys are too small to cover such a small population as the migrant population. So we are at an important moment now where in many countries around the world, population censuses of the 2020 round are getting prepared or even conducted. And these censuses offer a unique opportunity to start the World Migration Survey, at least to do pilots in a number of countries. Censuses, indeed, they provide the detailed distribution of households on the territory, and if the census has an information about the place and the country of birth, and possibly about previous members or former members of the household who are actually living abroad, then the census will be able to provide detailed information at a very precise level on where the migrants are. So it is extremely favorable for conducting a stratified sampling procedure. Not only this, but a sample comprises a comprehensive list of individuals, providing a unique sampling list for randomly selected individuals to be selected in the World Migration Survey. So, of course, the best for the migration survey, at least for the pilots, would be to conduct that survey just after this round of population censuses. And for this, ideally, the World Migration Survey, will be conducted by national statistical offices, not by universities, I think. Moreover, it should be a world survey. And for this, we need to share conceptual and operational definitions on migrants and related issues in census questionnaires in different countries. Next slide, please. So the requirement for this is to adopt first a common definition of an international migrant. And I think that now the universal definition is to consider international migrants born abroad individuals. So the defining variable is really the country of birth, but a useful complementary variable, in particular for the study of the political, cultural, etc., correlates of migration, is the country of citizenship, so country of birth and country of citizenship. Other relevant variables are the country of residence, either 1 year or preferably 5 years prior to the census, the last country of residence, and the year of arrival in the country. Well, these are the questions you can find in population censuses. Of course, population censuses are good, are excellent, but they are not perfect. Typically, population censuses miss or undercount certain categories of population in relation to migration. Those with an irregular status in the country where they live, for example, seasonal migrants who are not present the whole year, recently arrived migrants, etc. So these people are missed by population censuses, but a good sampling procedure should enable the World Migration Survey to reach these people.
Philippe, you have
Yes.
2 more minutes.
Okay, so I'm just done now. The next slide. So there are several challenges ahead. Reaching a consensus on concepts and variables, on the questionnaire design, etc., is a problem. That will be a matter of debates between statisticians, population scientists, and other migration experts. Keeping the questionnaire short enough to be reasonably doable is important, and also responding to policy-oriented and as well as theoretical questions will be important. There are also, and this is our last slide, operational and financial challenges. The World Migration Survey has a cost, and fundraising is an important preliminary step. It must address conceptual challenges, organizing discussions between migration experts, statisticians, policymakers is necessary at this present stage. And as I said, taking advantage on ongoing population censuses means that we must now act very fast. So I said already that national statistical offices should be in charge, and I want to finish by saying that we are currently working with the African Union and IOM to do a pilot in Africa. So thank you for listening to me. And I think that our other presenters will talk about this pilot in Africa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Philippe. Silvia, please.
Thank you, Marcela. Well, first of all, it's good to see everybody, even though it's through this virtual space. Greetings from Mexico City, and I'm also glad to see many of my colleagues from Latin America connected to this session. Thanks to Marcela Cerruti for the organization and invitation to participate in this panel. Of course, that I applaud the initiative of the World Migration Survey and the possibility of having comparable data, timely, reliable, capturing different flows, raised at both regions of origin and destination. And I think, as already Philippe mentioned, that is totally justified given the growing and emerging migration flows, the heterogeneity in the nature of these flows, and the need of reliable and timely information to build a sustainable system of global migration governance. And in addition, we need empirically based and informed public policies, including migration policies, but not only migration policies, because some of the issues that have to do with, for example, the consequences of migration are related to social policies in general. I would like to start my comments talking about Latin America and the migration scenario at the end of the decade. So this is 2020. What have we learned about the region, the pressing needs, what we need to know to build a regional migration governance? And I think that one of the main conclusions when we look at this decade is that Latin America is a highly mobile region. We saw an increase in the heterogeneity of the flows, the south-south migration, but also south-north flows with US and Europe as main destinations. We saw a large increase of return migration from Europe and the US to the countries of origin after the Great Recession. And we also documented the possibility of remigrations, for example, links and plans concerning stays in both countries. We saw the emergence of new flows from Latin American countries to another Latin American countries. For example, I would like to mention here, Haitians moving to South American countries. We saw rapid changes and massive flows responding to economic and political uncertainty. And here, the best example is the Venezuelan exodus. And we learned also about changes in the profile of the flows. This component of family migrations, families that stay together, move together, or that have periods of separation. Now it's more visible, the presence of children in the flow, the emergence of dual or multiple citizenships, and the particular mobility patterns of this population. Migrations flows linked to the increase of violence within the region, especially homicides and the organized crimes, and in particular in Mexico and in Central America. The expectation of larger flows due to environmental issues and climate change, and these particularities of in-transit migration moving, for example, in caravans and staying in border cities. And I think we started a discussion also about the integration of migrants in Latin America within this perception of Latin America countries as destinations. There were rapid changes, and as expected, public policies were very slow in terms of responding or adapting to this changing migration scenario. As Philippe already mentioned, our main source of information for studying international migration within the region is the census. We know about foreign-born population, about 5-year migration, the place of residence 5 years ago, and we have the information every 10 years. Julieta Bengochea, which is in this session, wrote a great dissertation that included an analysis of these data sources. We have uneven, not comparable, sometimes unreliable and insufficient administrative data. So given the context and the accessibility of data, Latin America is also a fertile space for this exercise. And I know that the plans are to pilot in Africa, but I think it would be great if there were a chance to plan a pilot in Latin America, given certain advantages that the region has, for example, the language. So yeah, we have Spanish, Portuguese, Creole, some French, but I think it's easier. We have a lot of common codes, a lot of work in the national statistic offices that would allow to have this cooperation. And Latin America is largely urban, which may also facilitate this piloting. And I think that these characteristics, language and common codes, make it favorable for a design of a comparable questionnaire. In aside, I know that there's an emphasis on working with national statistics, but we also have experience in gathering migration information with the support of local teams through universities. So these possible alliances of national statistics and universities, I think it's also a plus. So I just leave it as an idea, and I think it would be great to present this to other international organizations and to the countries that I think will be interested. Second, Marcela asked me to talk a little bit about prior experiences of multi-sided surveys in Latin America. as well as Marcela, I have been connected and working with the Latin American Migration Project and with the prior, its predecessor, the Mexican Migration Project, both led by Jorge Duran and Douglas Massey. And LAMP has gathered information in more than 12 countries from 1998, mainly through 2012. But in 2019, it raised a new round along with a group from La Universidad de la República in Montevideo, Uruguay. And the interesting thing is that there was a change, and in this case, there was an emphasis or a focus on immigrants at destination. No, so it was interesting. The exercise was interesting because it forced LAMP to rethink a questionnaire according to this changing migration scenario, still keeping the comparability that has been gained through more than 20 years of experience. The LAMP has this retrospective perspective with a similar design to what Philippe has mentioned in terms of many of the issues, the retrospective data, household information, and for selected individuals, complete labor, migration, family, now educational also, trajectories. And there has been a prior experience in adapting the ethno-survey, the questionnaire, to the particularities of each country. And it has led to a wide research in many topics, for example, comparable studies among the countries that have been selected for the lab in terms of use of remittances, migration and occupational mobility, difference in gender patterns of migration within the countries in the region, migration and violence, to mention some of them. There's also, I think, a wide experience to be recovered on the work on the field. As I already mentioned, for example, this combination of working with universities in countries, the training of those in charge of the field work and interviews, which is also facilitated by the common language, and the experience of having the data publicly available. And that's why we have so many dissertations, articles, and policy papers based on LAMP. But I think that the main attributes of LAMP are for the comparability among countries, because it allows us to look at different experiences and not just look at one's regional, in the case, I'm Mexican, in the case of Mexican demographers, I said that we are usually biased because we think that US-Mexican migration is the model for some others. And we have learned that no, it's not. And on the other side, because this retrospective perspective allows us to link migration to other processes, labor, family, and the context in space and in time. I'm about to close. I know that when you are working on a new questionnaire, people start asking for new and new things. And as Philippe has already mentioned, one of the challenges is to keep the questionnaire short and compact. But as a commentator, I can just ask and then see the reactions. First, I would like to, Marcela already mentioned that the survey was designed before the pandemic. Well, this idea has been working on before the pandemic. I don't know if you have thought, as many of us involved with fieldwork are doing, about alternative ways of data collection given the current scenario. The second has to do with in-transit migration. It is very briefly mentioned in the document that we received. I know that it's very difficult to capture, but if there any consideration about in-transit migration. The third has to do with the link between internal and international migration, because all the document is based on international migration. As Philippe already mentioned, it's international migrants are very small in relative terms to the national populations, but internal migration is higher. And we have also seen links between both, so that's another question. And finally, as I mentioned, I have been working a lot with US-Mexican migration, which usually we use US data to look at recent flows, but there's always this lack of information about the context, that it's not only the country of origin, no? So usually you only have whether it's Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, the country of origin. If it would be good to have more information about the context of origin regarding, for example, where it's urban, rural, in order to make more clear these comparisons and how it works with local information. And that's it. Thank you, Marcela. And I'm looking forward to seeing the data collected and start using it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Yeah, you have proposed very interesting questions. So now I will ask Frank to follow. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, thank you, Marcela. Can you hear me? Yes, good.
Yes, yes,
Thank
yes.
goodness for that. Okay, I'll briefly introduce myself, and then I want to talk about what we're doing in Africa, and then highlight the potential for doing something similar in Latin America. So my name is Frank Lasco. I'm the director of IOM's Global Migration Data Analysis Center, which was set up 5 years ago in Berlin. I'm also with Diego, our next discussant, Iturralde, the co-chair of the UN's expert group on migration statistics. And this is important not because we are the co-chairs, but because that group is going to be making recommendations to all countries regarding the overall framework for defining international migration within the context of global mobility. So I have 1 or 2 questions for Philippe. Now, as you can imagine, I mean, I think we're probably preaching to the converted, and everyone who is online probably thinks this is a great idea. Now, I'm working for the UN, and my job is to help you sell this idea and to actually make this happen, because we've been talking about this for at least 10 years or so. I'm sorry to be blunt. So I also think that, so I want to first of all, give you some good news and then also raise some challenges here. On the plus side, I think this is a very good moment to be talking about this type of a global migration survey, or global migration and mobility survey. Let's see what we want to call it, for a number of reasons. Number one, from a UN perspective, the Secretary General sitting in New York next to Ellen Craley only last month said that the entire UN system needs to wake up and treat data much more seriously. It needs to value the data that it collects. The UN is supposed to be, or seen as, an authoritative voice on a range of global issues such as climate change and also migration, and it needs to be able to share solid evidence on these topics. And we need to really value the information that is circulating and not being fully utilized around the world on this. Within IOM, the leading UN migration agency, which also coordinates the UN migration network of all UN agencies working on migration, we recently released or prepared an internal migration data strategy, which was shared with our member states in July. And this highlights the importance of working on data as part of our overall strategic plan for the next 5 years. And it argues that IOM should be investing far greater resources in this area to help migrants and our member states provide more evidence-based programming and policy approaches. So these are all positive developments. At the same time, as Marcella mentioned, we're living through a global pandemic where the idea of doing surveys is becoming more and more challenging, particularly face-to-face surveys. But it's not all bad news either, because the fact that every day when you turn on your TV screen or pick up a newspaper, data and statistics are in the headlines means that everyone around the world is paying much more attention to data. And what we hear from national statistical offices working in the migration field is, even if their capacity to deliver at the moment is being constrained, they are being asked more questions about the impact of migration during this global pandemic. And they're being asked, for example, for more disaggregated information. So again, that is an opportunity, I think, for us. Now, what we have done in Africa is to try to move this debate forward we placed someone from our GIMDAC office in what's called Stat Afrique, which is the statistics unit of the African Union, which is based in Tunis, back in September of this year. And we've asked her to support the work of the African Union on migration data. Last week, as Hélène mentioned, we were able to organize with Statistics Sweden and the African Union a first training course on migration statistics. And in that course, we gave Hélène and my colleague Marie-Luz an opportunity to present the survey, the idea of a world migration survey with a focus on Africa. Now, why Africa? Well, politically, a year ago, the Pan-African Summit held in Cairo, or just over a year ago, Pan-African Forum there, which brings together African Union member states, actually proposed the idea of some kind of Africa migration survey, completely separate from the idea of any world migration survey. So what we have done is try to bring everyone together, the African Union, the IUSSP, and other partners across the UN, to try and move this discussion forward. And next week, on Wednesday of next week, my colleague who is based in Tunis, Marie-Luz, will be making a presentation, I think, with the African Union team to the Director Generals of the African Union countries, calling for the implementation of an African migration survey and a couple of, or a series of initial pilot studies to be conducted in countries as yet to be determined. And so all that Philippe has said this afternoon or this morning is absolutely relevant and extremely helpful. And I think hopefully next week we will get a positive sign, and we may at least get the green light to try and take this forward next year in Africa. But I also think that there is scope to be doing more in Latin America. Ahead of this meeting today, I shared with Marcela a set of a background presentation that my colleagues prepared. We have something called the Global Migration Data Portal, which we launched 3 years ago in Berlin. And we have a regional page focusing on Latin America, which compiles all the data that is currently available for Latin America. And as many of you know, you will see lots of gaps there in information. Now, so I think it would make a lot of sense if in trying to develop this idea forward, if we could also try and look for partners in Latin America so that we could also identify, let's say, 2 pilot countries in Latin America and adopt a similar methodology to the methodology and approach that we are developing in Africa. Now, one footnote with respect to what Philippe has said, I think that whilst there could be a core component of these surveys, national authorities will also have some special interests, and migration will obviously varies across the world, and they have different concerns. So there needs to be probably some flexibility. There probably needs to be a core set of questions that is used or administered in most of these surveys, and some nationally specific questions. Now, as was mentioned at the beginning, the UN system has done this before. We have the World Fertility Survey. Also, we have the UNICEF Multiple Indicators Cluster Survey, which has now been running for 25 years. 343 surveys have been carried out in over 100 countries around the world in the last 25 years. Which brings me now to the politics of this, because in order to make this happen, you're going to need not only money, but you also need political buy-in. And I noticed that Philippe said, you know, we need to work with the national statistical offices. Well, that means governments. And that means you need to be able to persuade them that there is some value in investing in this kind of survey. Now, in the case of the UNICEF Multiple Indicators Cluster Survey, that's mainly a survey to collect data on vulnerable women and children, and it's fairly easy to make the argument there for better data. Migration is a much more toxic topic. It's a much more politically sensitive issue, and countries are not always happy to share a lot of information about it. And so that it will be potentially challenging to make the case for such a survey. On the positive side, however, we have an agreement called the Global Compact on Migration, which has been signed by most countries in the world, which encourages all of them to do more to improve data on international migration. So I think we can refer to that document in making the case for a world migration survey. Just one last point on Latin America. The International Forum on Migration Statistics is the largest gathering of people around the world interested in improving data on migration statistics. The last conference was held in January of this year in Cairo, and there was a presentation of the World Migration Survey by the IUSSP. The next forum, the next global forum, will be probably held in Mexico in 2022 if Mexico agrees to host the forum. The UNDESA, OECD, and IOM are the lead organizers, and we're currently hoping to find a country in Latin America which will be willing to host the next survey, because the first meeting was in Europe, the second meeting was in Africa, and now it's the turn of Latin America. Now, if that happens, I think that also adds weight to the arguments in favor of perhaps conducting a couple of pilot surveys in Latin America. Now, I want to finish off by posing a few questions to Philippe, which is, first of all, the UN expert group on migration is talking a lot about mobility and migration and treating migration as a subset of mobility. And so that begs, and somebody mentioned, the previous speaker mentioned internal migration. And, so we have to be clear, what is it we want to really focus on in this survey, and what do we want to call it? And there are various pros and cons here. Maybe Diego has some reflections on this, because there is a draft paper which has already been or will be shared with the Secretary General, which outlines some of the proposed changes that the UN Statistics Division is proposing, including, I think, a modified definition of who counts as an international migrant, based primarily on change of residence. But anyway, so that's one issue. What is the focus and terminology, and how do we look at this conceptually? The other question, I think, is what's all of this going to cost, and what's the value of conducting these surveys compared to collecting data on migration in other ways? Somebody mentioned new technologies, big data, or administrative data sources. We really do need to look at some of the costs here, and we will need to be able to demonstrate that there is a particular value in investing in this kind of approach, and that this kind of approach will provide us with answers that we might not get by pursuing other methods. And then there is a last question, which is, who owns the data? Who controls all of this? In an ideal world, Marcella could go to George Soros and ask for a big check, and this could be a civil society initiative, and you wouldn't have to worry about what anybody thinks. You just go ahead and do your survey, although you probably would still need to work with national authorities. But it's likely that this is going to be, certainly in the case of Africa, it's going to be endorsed by countries. You're going to work with national statistical offices. And so there has to be a conversation about how all of this is managed and who decides on the questions, how is the information collected and released. There have been problems in the past with Eurostat sponsored surveys in some countries. Some countries have gone along with conducting the surveys, but they've been more reluctant to release the information or to allow others to analyze the information. So I think you have to think about all these things as well as the technical questions about sampling design and the conceptual framework, etc. So, and that's probably maybe not something for this audience, but it's something that's definitely in our minds in the UN, and probably I'll pass the baton now on to Diego because he's sitting in a government office in South Africa, a national statistical office. So he needs to think about what the government of South Africa thinks about this as well. Okay, Marcella, have I spoken for too long? Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. First, Frank, I already sent a message that whoever wants to get access to your document, they can write directly to me because I cannot attach the file here.
Okay,
so,
no problem.
but please do, because it's a very interesting document. And also, you mentioned the compact, the global compact. I would also mention the SDGs because we have
of course. Yes.
to have data, disaggregated data, and we don't have it. So, okay, Diego, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me first start off by thanking the organizer of this session to invite me to speak at it. For me, it's an extremely important and special occasion at a personal level, having been born in Latin America, in Bolivia, to speak at a population association of people from my region is really special. So thank you so much for this. The worst thing about speaking last is that everybody's almost said what I want to say. So I'm going to try and not repeat other people wherever I can. I think that the issue of a World Migration Survey first was resuscitated during the negotiation phase of the Global Compact for Migration, where there was a very strong call for something like this to happen. Like Philippe has said, the model that we want to follow is to follow the transition of the World Fertility Survey that transitioned into the Demographic and Health Survey, which today is being conducted in many developing countries. It's a syndicated survey with a standard questionnaire with additional modules. It's a well set up and a well respected survey. This, however, is not the first time that we are hearing of a World Migration Survey. I think Philippe mentioned the various initiatives in the past. Even in South Africa, I made an appeal as far back as 2008 for a migration-specific survey, because we always find migration questions in a health survey, we'll find migration surveys in a labor survey, in a census, here and everywhere. It's always on the coattails of other initiatives, but it never has had a home, or it's never had a tool which is its own, and whereby we can ask more detailed questions, a multiplicity of questions on a multiplicity of themes wherever as we see fit. So I think the intent is to establish a global data source that looks at the characteristics of various types of migrants, including refugees and asylum seekers, such as their household characteristics, access to services, remittances, and comparison in places of origin and destination. Current surveys are cross-sectional and would only look at what is available, what is the experience of the migrant at the place of destination, and very little is known about the migrant's experience at the place of origin. Some challenges in realizing this survey will include the sampling strategy, the development of the questionnaire, And since everyone has been throwing a question, I'm going to throw my first question in here already, and that is about household immigration. We talk about an immigration module, but usually when a household emigrates as a whole, which in many cases, at least in South Africa, in many cases, the emigration is of a full household, then there's nobody left behind to report on that emigration. Incidentally, in 2016, we ran an intercensal survey called the community survey. We included a immigration module, and most of the responses that we got were from migrants who were returning to their country of origin, and those were being captured as immigrants, which was not the objective of the module. So as Frank has said, Frank and I are the two co-chairs of the UN Expert Group on International Migration Statistics. And I think that the concepts and definitions coming out of this expert group are really going to drive the definitional aspect of the survey. I think that when we presented to the specialized technical group of the African Union, questions were asked about what is a migrant. You know, a migrant in Nigeria will be different to one in South Africa. And I think we need to take a uniform approach through the Statistics Commission, who will receive our recommendations in March next year. So as far as Africa is concerned, a proposal was made to hold an African migration survey as a type of a pilot to the proposed global survey. And this took place notwithstanding the initiative at the PAFOM and the Pan-Africanist Forum on Migration, also at the Union for African Population Studies in Kampala, which I know many of you or some of you were in attendance. At this session, a proposal was made, let's have an African migration survey as a pilot to the World Migration Survey. And since the UAPS is part of the family of associations of the IUSSP, Professor Crayley has been facilitating on behalf of the IUSSP, listening to various stakeholders around views around this World Migration Survey. And within Africa, through the interaction with the IOM and IOM GIMDAC, Statafrique, as Frank has indicated, a presentation will be made to the African Union Directors General next week, which we are looking forward to receiving a positive response to that. So the selection of countries for the African pilot, so this is almost going to be like a pilot within a pilot, have been based on a mix of countries that are mostly sending and receiving. I think one of the misconceptions was that we are trying to pair a sending and a receiving country together, and this is not the case. We just want a diversity of countries who have both characteristics. So for now, the proposed countries, and this is subject to confirmation, are Mauritania, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Burkina Faso, Gabon, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. The main survey, however, it will be the same survey for all countries. I think we have heard that the sample frame must take geospatial representation of migrants into account from the most recent census from within the 2020 round of census. And I think that's an important thing to consider, because migration is highly spatialized. Where we sample and where we choose to oversample really is determined on the geography of where migrants reside. I think we need a framework that will look at indirect analysis of phenomena that cannot be measured directly. So here I'm talking about undocumented migration, which is a big concern in South Africa. And of course, also the immigration that I spoke about earlier, with particular respect to household immigration. So then in closing, let me just say two things. The World Migration Survey is an opportunity which at this point in time we cannot afford not to take advantage of. It fits perfectly with a call for more data, better data, which is in line with Objective 1 of the Global Compact, It falls in line with SDG goal 17.18 that speaks about disaggregation by migrant status. It falls in line with the African Union's vision of 2063 and various other global and regional developmental frameworks. So the time for a World Migration Survey is now, and it cannot be denied. So I would like to put a challenge out, and I'm very glad that Sylvia has already raised the potential of this, and that Frank is highlighting the mechanisms through which we can realize this, but a challenge to the Latin American population community to consider a pilot of its own in the region, so that as the Global South, we have a strong case at the global level to advise the rest of the world around the establishment of a World Migration Survey. And I mean, when last did the Global South tell the Global North what to do? With that, muito obrigado, muchas gracias, thank you so much.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Diego, muchas gracias. And well, you know, I would love the idea of Silvia and Diego to pilot, obviously, this survey in Latin America. So we have to start pushing for it. So I'm going to just make a few comments reacting to what has been said. But in the meantime, because I think that we will have like about 10 minutes, if you want, you can write down some of the questions. Just quick reactions for Silvia. Well, alternatives for COVID, I think that there are none up to now, because I'm not very confident. And then I answer also a question about that Frank poses on other ways to collect this type of information. There are other ways to collect some type of information on migration. Obviously, big data is one of that, and there are surveys that have been collected, but we know already the huge biases that that information have. And also another factor is that the information collected through those means is really few. I mean, you cannot ask many questions. I mean, there are several limitations to actually get the type of data we want to get with this survey through other mechanisms. So that will be one. On transit, we thought about that, Silvia, and I think that probably we have to be creative on how to adapt other ways to measure, for example, transit migration, and Diego talked about irregular migration. In the meeting in El Cairo, I heard very interesting ways on how to count irregular population workers in Africa through satellite images, and then from there to gather a sample. I mean, there are ways to think about specific matters. One of the points that made Diego on the household immigration, how to capture immigration where the whole household is gone, that is a problem. That is a problem that we have to think more about it, because there are countries in which if you do that, you will collect a massive amount of people because they leave people behind. But in many countries, Argentina is one of those, when they migrate, you know, the whole family. So you don't have that kind of huella, no? And about mobility and migration, I think that, Frank, here also we have to be a little bit flexible and generate indicators with different time spans and with different points, the migration points, and putting together with Silvia's comments, I think that it would be very interesting to collect some information on internal migration in order to tie together internal migration with international migration. But I'm not going to take more time. I don't know if, Philippe, you want to react to some of the comments? Well, Philippe is not there. Okay. There it is.
He is, but he's muted. He's muted.
You are muted. You are muted.
Okay, now you can hear me. No, I think we don't have much time, Marcella. So how long do we have? We cannot start a discussion on all the very, very good and useful points. My reaction to all this is that there is still much to do, a lot of challenges ahead. First, there are political issues that we have to solve. We have to make sure that policymakers will be happy with what we are going to do, that it will be useful for them, that we are able, in addition to all the comparability objective that we have, to address the specific needs that, of course, vary tremendously from country to country, as Frank said. So that's the first point. I think working more on the political dimension or the policy and political dimension is important. The second line I think we have to reflect on a bit more is the technical issue. There are many, many technical issues with the survey itself in terms of sampling, etc. Also with what is not in the survey. I heard several of you talking about the big data, about other sources. What is it that we can really do with this? Is it competing with money investment that we want to make on the World Migration Survey? So we need to have a more technical reflection on what we want to bring exactly and what is it that survey can bring compared with what other sources can bring. So the comparative advantage of the survey must be documented in technical terms. And third, I think we must also have a more theoretical line of reflection. We want to know what kind of progress we are going to do through that survey to the understanding of a key issue of the present, which is international migration. So I think that these three lines, political, technical, and theoretical, we must work on this. And I'm pretty sure that my IUSSP colleagues not only are ready to work on this, but we can also mobilize a bit more the scientific community within IUSSP, the population studies community, which is extremely rich on this domain of migration. So I think, and I speak under the control of Hélène, that we can now do much more than has been done in outreaching to the IUSSP community, to the population studies community, and the many hundreds of people who are seriously reflecting on these issues and doing also work on migration, whether policy orientated or theoretical or technical. So these are not responses to the extremely interesting issues which have been discussed, but this is what I want to say now. Also, I think it would be a very great idea if we could have not only Africa but also Latin America, in order to cover more of the global south in that. That would be absolutely great. Yes, some part of the world would still be missing. Asia, in particular, South Asia would be missing. But why not? I don't know if we can also try to expand our project to one or two pilot in South Asia. That would be. I'm now looking at you, Frank, on this because you are the global data person. To have the three continents both for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. Hélène.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, thank you, Philippe, on several points. South Asia, the next International Population Conference will be in India. So it would seem to me that would be an appropriate way to launch and engage our colleagues in the population sciences in Asia, which is perfectly appropriate. And of course, there are such distinctive migration patterns in Asia. So this would make our suite of inquiry and pilots very, very robust from the global south. So I think that's something we should definitely be thinking about. Philippe, I loved your third point of the challenge for theoretical reflection. I think that is, if we're talking about knowledge, robust knowledge, we need models that help us predict, which are policy relevant, but also scientifically relevant. And that then goes to Sylvia's very fine reminder of the resources of research institutes and universities as ways to help us have repositories of building theories, models, and issues of at least hypotheses and predictions, which is a real growth industry in migration studies. Something that's it's a kind of a corner of our of the population sciences that I think we actually need to integrate survey data with thinking about model building and hence theory. So Philippe, thank you very much. And I think this really resonates with Sylvia's point about effective strategic partnerships. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all. After this, oh, Frank, you want to say something? Okay.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to support what was said. No, I think the idea of maybe having 6 countries, 2 per region, is a great idea. There are pros and cons when you come to individual countries, but we can look into that. Philippe also said something important that we shouldn't lose sight of. Capacity development, capacity building. It's easier to get resources and to make a case for this type of initiative if you say that you're not just taking data out of countries, but you're also helping those countries to build their capacity to collect better data in the future. And while you were speaking, Diego and I had a private conversation, and Diego, can I tell them the results and put you on the spot? This is not going to be cheap. I mean, in the case of South Africa, he thinks it might cost $4 million. Now you start adding up, you know, 50 countries in your survey, that's a lot of money. So if you're serious about this work, you really have to have very strong arguments, because the reality is that in South Africa, the National Statistical Office is actually losing resources, not gaining resources at the moment. Sorry, Diego, but I just thought your message to me really nailed it on the head here. So we need a reality check as well.
Thank you, Frank. No, I think one thing we must take into account is that statistical offices around the world, not only in Africa, are receiving less and less financial resources. And in an environment where that is happening, there needs to be an impetus, a financial impetus from outside of government to make this happen. One small thing that I just wanted to say before we close, I think Frank said something about big data and about different ways of collecting the data. I was on a webinar with IOM Research this morning, and one of the points that I stressed there, that it's not either or. It's not big data or traditional data, but it's really about the integration of the two together. So we can take aerial photographs with remote sensing to look at new settlements from the air, but we won't know anything about the people who are there. And that is where census and surveys then are very useful, that tell us about those people, so that we can understand who are these people, why did they come and live in these new settlements, so that we don't leave them behind. I think that kind of integration between new sources and traditional sources is an important one to make.
Okay, this is gonna shut down in any moment now. Yeah. So we now have to start looking for private and international funding. That is our first mission. So, well, thank you again, all of you. It has been a very stimulated session, and we hope to get in touch. Thank you.
Marcella, maybe the IUSSP team and IOM and Diego can have a follow-up call, specifically focusing on Latin America and the idea of a pilot there.
Of course, great.
Maybe you can arrange that. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
And Sylvia.
Oh, of course. Myself and Silvia, yeah, my
Yes, yes.
colleague, my Mexican
Yeah.
colleague, of course. Yeah. Okay,
Okay,
well, bye-bye,
bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Buenas
Muchas
noches.
gracias. Chao, chao.
Chao, chao,
Bye-bye.
gracias a todos y a todas.
Gracias, Marcela. Bye to everybody. Nice to see you virtually.
Yeah.